into the offseason. I'm your host, Cassie Carlson, and we have a great show today with two powerhouse guests. It's an all-female show, which I love because it is Women's History Month, the month of March. And this is my good friend, Courtney Cronin from ESPN. She is in studio with us to talk all things free agency. And then later in the show, we'll hear from Bears player personnel coordinator Ashton Washington, who is the first full-time female scout in Bears history. She is a superstar. So, Courtney, thanks for coming on the show. I'm excited to talk to you about free agency. We were both up at Hallis Hall last week. They're on Wednesday meeting some of the new guys, and especially two of the interior offensive linemen. I want to go back to 2 weeks ago. You start hearing about the trades, Jonah Jackson, Joe Thuney, and then they bring in Drew Dahlman in free agency. What were your reactions from seeing that the Bears could actually go out there and overhaul the interior of the offensive line, and then hearing them talk?
Yeah, Ben Johnson put his money where his mouth is. He said at the Combine when I asked him, is it possible to flip an entire part of an offensive line? A big portion of that unit in one offseason. He said, yeah, Carolina did it last year. There's other examples. And within a matter of 6 days, the Bears were able to do it with the Jonah Jackson trade, then Joe Thuney in less than about 15, 16 hours, and then getting the top center in free agency in Drew Dahlman. And I think the priorities were so clear for free agency for Ryan Poles. That was the weak link. Caleb Williams took 68 sacks. Obviously, not all 68 sacks were on the quarterback. Not all were on the offensive line. But there is a big portion of this offensive line that was the weakness.
An interesting thing that people were curious about is where Jonah Jackson is going to play. Because his best seasons came at left guard in Detroit. And then he moved around the line when he was in L.A. Some weird circumstances with injuries and such, and being left out of the rotation on the offensive line, essentially. Surprised that they're putting him there and having Joe Thuney. It's like a weird question because Joe Thuney is also best at left guard and one of the best. But to move Jonah Jackson to a new position, were you surprised by that decision at all?
Well, we really need to find out how this order went about, because Jonah Jackson was traded for on a Tuesday, and then the next day they bring in Joe Thuney, and Jonah Jackson was working out, and he said that a teammate told him oh, you guys got Joe Thuney too. So I'm sure he probably thought initially he was going to be playing left guard in Chicago. He started 40 games for Ben Johnson at that position when Ben Johnson was the offensive coordinator. Clearly, it's where he's most comfortable, but he also did point to playing right guard. His first start with the Lions came in Chicago all those years ago. I think the big thing that we look at what happened last year, is it an outlier or is it more of what to expect from Jonah Jackson at this point in his career? He had the injury. He said that was an injury that was relayed to him like a freak accident, something that they typically only see in car wrecks, what happened in his shoulder during training camp. He starts 4 games. He's, put on injured reserve. He's trying to come back, but then he gets benched. I just think it was playing out of position that put him in a really tough spot, because he not only played left guard, right guard, he played a little bit of center too. That's one thing that Bears fans can be excited about with this offensive line.
There's no question.
Unlike years past, we don't have a converted guard playing center. You have a true center playing center, and I know it sounds simple in theory. They cross-train all of those guys on the interior because they have to due to injury, but to have a true center playing center, having your guards play guard, it's a novel concept, but I promise you it works more times than not.
Montez Sweat, you're hoping you get a better, more productive season from him. You paid him, $98 million after trading for him. Is Dayo Odeyingbo, they're hoping he hasn't reached his potential yet, only 25 years old. But even if the production doesn't increase to what they're hoping, if he frees up Montez Sweat, is that worth it in itself?
I don't think they're having an expectation that he comes in here and hits double-digit sacks right away. But the fact that you mentioned, he's 25. He'll be 26 when he plays this season. He's got a lot of football left in the tank. They're betting on the upside. They're betting that he's going to be a high-ceiling player for this team. And what that does for Montez Sweat, to be able to have somebody that you fear, somebody that you game plan for on the other side of the defensive line, that should take away, at least in theory, the chips, the double teams, all the stuff that Montez Sweat had to deal with, all the added attention that only led him to 5.5 sacks last year. So this is as much as much of an investment on the entire defensive line. But speaking to Montez specifically, you're right. They did pay him $98 million. He's the highest paid player on this roster. They need that production to manifest itself like it did in only a handful of games when he was traded here in 2023.
How valuable would the leadership in the locker be for guys like Joe Thuney and Grady Jarrett to step in there, have experience, know what it looks like to win, and be able to share the steps that need to be taken and use the right words to the locker room this next season.
I think it's interesting that last year they had 8 captains
because they had none, no
from
leaders,
the offensive line or defensive line. To me, that's a big problem. You've got to have your players who are the no-nonsense type, the players that you fall in line behind. They didn't have that up front. There is something to be said about guys in the trenches carrying that mindset and mentality that others will follow by. Joe Thuney's resume speaks for itself. I mean, the guy protected Tom Brady. He protected Patrick Mahomes. He's coming off back-to-back all-pro seasons. He's got 4 Super Bowl rings. If I'm Braxton Jones, if I'm Darnell Wright, if I'm any of these players, I'm like, I want to be like him. I want to fall in line, and I want to learn how to do it the way that he does, because at 32 years old, he's the best guard in the league still. And he's got more football left in the tank, so much so that the Bears felt necessary to trade for him. That's a sign of a culture shift, I think, that's going to take place on the offensive line. And then for someone like Grady Jarrett, who was with one team for 10 seasons, got like a personal note for him, from the owner of the Falcons, Arthur Blank, thanking him for his time with the organization, thanking him for his contributions to the Falcons, to the city. Not every player gets that. So I think for a leadership role, he will clearly be the alpha along that offensive line. Now, it doesn't mean it's a bad thing if you're someone like Montez Sweat, who wants to lead by example, and other players who are learning, what is my leadership style? What is the role that I should play here? To have somebody who's done it for so long and seen players come in and out and still been that consistent force like he was in Atlanta, I think that's a very good thing for the Chicago Bears defense. From what you've gathered, talking to other reporters, other sources, how intense of a coach is Ben Johnson? I guess we'll only know as an offensive coordinator, but how you expect that to translate as a head coach? It is interesting because you don't have the body of work, because he has only been an offensive coordinator. That's his highest level of coaching in the NFL, and you can gather some of it just from the moxie he shows in calling all of these trick plays. He did it against the Bears with Stumblebum, and he loved to talk about that in his introductory press conference, and some of the players mentioned it. But I do think on top of, the window dressing and the flash and all of that, there's substance to Ben Johnson that's going to rub off on the rest of the team, because they didn't just bring him in to be the X's and O's guy. They brought him in to establish a culture when he just came from a place that went from bottom to top in the NFC North in a matter of a couple seasons. That takes more than just talented players. That takes more than just, the coach who can out-scheme other coaches. That takes somebody who knows what it's like to build something, to build a culture, and to sustain it no matter who comes in and out of your system. So for the first OTA being early, obviously all teams with new coaches get that. I imagine there will be a pretty intense message in that first team meeting for the guys who show up, because remember, they are voluntary. But I would imagine there's going to be pretty good attendance, especially when you have a new guy in the building that most of these players have not been around yet, they're going to want to hear what he has to say and what his message is and what is going to be expected of them throughout the offseason. And then we'll get a feel for what Ben Johnson can do for these players and this team. We got to take a break. When we come back, we're going to make some predictions for this season and how likely some milestones may be. The barometer is coming up right after the break. Welcome back to the Offseason. I'm Cassie Carlson, joined by ESPN's Courtney Cronin, and we're playing a little game right now. We built a barometer, which you can see on your screen, and we're going to have a sliding scale to get a feel for how likely or unlikely some of these statements may be. So if you fully believe this could happen, you're going to call it bear-leavable. Bear-leavable. And then if you don't think it's going to happen, like there's no chance, it is going to be unbearable. So you can I'm going to fire them away at you, and you can give me a quick response, or you can justify if you want to. The first one is the Bears will have a top 5 run game. I would like to say it's teetering towards unbearable, which sounds awful because I don't think that they're done adding in the running back room right now. If they get Ashton Genty, that will change, but it all depends on what they do in the draft. Are they using the top 10 pick on a running back? Can they go day 2 and find somebody? But as it stands right now, I don't think that's a top 5 running back, top 5 run game, given the running backs in that room. They need a complementary piece to DeAndre Swift if they want to recreate Sonic and Knuckles in Chicago. All right, well, since you just hinted at something, that's another one of my questions. I'm going to go out of order. The next one is the Bears will draft a running back with the 10th overall pick, and all assumptions would be that would be Ashton Genty. Well, Ryan Poles did say after free agency that all options are available to them, and of course that's the politically correct answer, but He's not lying. That's the right answer. They could go offensive line there. Go get your left tackle for the future. Another pass rusher. He said you can never have enough. Tyler Warren. Maybe you want to have a chess piece that you can use as a hybrid receiver tight end or running back. If they're going best player available there, the Ashton Genty conversation becomes much more realistic because they do need to upgrade the running back room. They paid DeAndre Swift a lot of money in free agency last year. The run game wasn't great. They've already upgraded the offensive line, so naturally you would anticipate that the run blocking, pass blocking, all of that will improve. They need to improve their personnel in that room to be as multiple as they want to be in the running game. So I would say if you ask for unbearable to bear leave it, I would bear leave it.
You would. That is a very bold choice, and I think I'd be very cautiously optimistic, but we saw Brad Holmes in Detroit have the last laugh when he took Jahmyr Gibbs.
12th overall. Not saying that they can't do it in the second round, too. I know that wasn't one of my choices, but
Caleb Johnson, maybe?
Quinshon Judkins. There are a lot of running backs on day 2 that could find their way to Chicago.
All right, here's another one. Caleb Williams will throw for 4,000 yards.
I'd say it's bare leavable. Jared Goff had 3 straight 4,000-yard seasons in Detroit. In that system, I think that they are designed to get the quarterback on the move. You'll see much more of that. Caleb finished as the third best single season for a passer in Chicago as a rookie, and he wasn't too far off from 4,000.
Can Rome Odunze and DJ Moore both go for 1,000 yards receiving?
I think that what you've seen in that offense in Detroit, whether it was Amon-Ra St. Brown, whether it was TJ Hawkinson when he was there, and then Sam Laporta taking over that role at tight end, Tim Patrick, I think that given the depth of the receiver room right now, they're probably happy that it's a little bit more defined than it was a year ago when you had 3 mouths that need to be fed. Now you've got DJ Moore and you've got Rome Odunze. Coming off Rome's rookie season, I think that he's ready to take the next step. It's a step below bare leave.
It's a sliding scale, so you can put it like 75%.
A little bit below bare leavable, probably at 75%. I think DJ certainly hits 1,000 yards. He will be the true alpha in that room, the number 1 receiver, and I think Rome is just behind that.
All right, let's go to defense. Montez Sweat records double-digit sacks with a single team for the first time in his career.
I'd say it's closer to bare leavable than not because we saw him do he got 6 sacks here in 2023 when he was traded. Teams really didn't know all of a sudden how to game plan for one really good edge rusher in Chicago. Last year he's limited to 5.5. When you have a formidable force on the other side of that defensive line, when you're creating pressures from all over, somebody's going to be freed up to go after the quarterback. I think Montez Sweat gets to 10 with one team.
Okay, love that. The Bears have multiple Pro Bowlers on defense this year?
I mean, they should. It was Jalen Johnson last year. I feel like that one should be a no-brainer considering Montez Sweat, Tremaine Edmonds, some of the building blocks on this defense were left off last season, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
I don't think that they deserve to be there, but I would imagine Dennis Allen, an attacking style defense, some new players that they brought in to help the pass rush, they should at least have 2.
Should we believe that, or bear leave, Caleb Williams will be a Pro Bowler?
That's a hard one just because he is going to be in year 2. So I went back and looked at the Pro Bowl rosters. I'll put it right in the middle. So whatever in the middle of of unbearable to
okay, so we're like, nah, prove it.
Like, he's got to prove it first. And I know the Pro Bowl is a popularity contest for all intents and purposes between players because they get a vote on this as well. There were 5 quarterbacks on last year's Pro Bowl roster. Can he beat out the likes of, Joe Burrow was there, Jared Goff was there, some of the guys that were on teams that didn't make deep playoff runs that become the alternates, they get in. I think Caleb's got to prove it and lead this team to the playoffs, or at least have them in line for the playoffs before he gets a Pro Bowl bid.
All right, we have one more, and this one's either going to leave Bears fans really happy and excited or really kind of like, oh my gosh, not again. Bears make the playoffs and win a game.
Ooh, that's a tough one, Cassie.
Don't be the pessimist.
I know, I don't want to be the glass half full person in March, but I think you've got to see it with this team to truly believe it because there was a lot of cart before the horse last year. Their priorities were a lot more clear in free agency to upgrade a roster that should absolutely be winning more than 5 games. Now, the NFC North is tough. It's not like they're doing this in the AFC South where all of a sudden they rise to being the best team in the division. I think they get to the playoffs. Now, if they win a game or not, at this point, we've got to see how this season plays out. But I think a 9-10 win season in a division where Minnesota is probably right there again, maybe not 14 wins, but right there. Detroit may have had to do some retooling, but a big portion of that roster is the same. And then Green Bay, do they take a step back? It felt like they were kind of on the downcline at the end of last season. Maybe that gives the Bears a chance to be the third team from this division in the postseason.
We'll call that a very level-headed, realistic response.
A nuanced take on
that. Courtney, thank you so much for stopping by. Always great stuff. When we come back, we meet a pioneer in the Bears organization. Ashton Washington is a key part of the Bears pulling off all their moves in free agency. Many describe her as a future NFL GM. She is a total superstar. My convo with Washington is coming up right after the break. March is Women's History Month, and fitting we have an all-female show this week. I wanted to highlight some of the amazing women working for the Chicago Bears, one of them being Ashton Washington. She's the Bears player personnel coordinator, and earlier this week, I caught up with her. I first want to go through your title and what it means for those who might not know. Player personnel coordinator, what is it, and what does that all entail?
For all 32 teams, that role is different for most. For me here with the Bears, it basically entails what Ryan Poles, our general manager, likes to say, the nervous system. So I'm working closely with our college scouts. I'm working closely with our pro scouts. I'm working closely with GM, assistant GM, and then also delivering key information to different departments such as equipment, such as strength and conditioning, our training staff, player engagement, and then most importantly, being a part of the evaluating process with our pro scouts and college scouts, and being a part of the process of bringing players in our building to help build our roster.
We actually talked 2 years ago when I first met you, and we did a story, and I remember mentioning at the time you were 26 years old because it was so young to have such a cool and important role in an NFL organization. I know as someone who's worked in sports, you have to work your way up, and every step of the way I've always experienced a little bit of imposter syndrome because you just have to prove yourself, and it builds confidence over time. Even in the last 2 years, how do you feel like you've become more confident in your role and taking its own ownership?
It starts with the people that I work with, the guys on, again, both the college and pro side, and from the top down. So that's starting with the McCaskey family, with Mr. Warren, with Poles, and just having the ability to, speak up, have a voice in the room, and never feel any type of way. They don't treat me as if I'm the only female here or only female doing this. It's more so you're a part of the team. You have your own opinions, your own viewpoints, and we want to collaborate and bring that into what we're doing. So for me personally, I've never felt imposter syndrome since I've been here. It's more so just how can we help you learn and continue to grow in this business?
I was talking to someone from the previous front office you were hired under, and then you talk to the same people in this front office, and they all have the same thing, is that you're just a superstar. And I feel like that's a credit to probably the work you've put in along the way and stuff like that. Who have been some of the biggest influences in your career as you have gotten to this point today?
It takes a village, right? So I've had many mentors, and I currently still have them now to this day. Family, as we talked about before, brother, dad, include mom, grandma, and so on. But for me, starting off in the Power Five, division was Coach Lovie Smith. He brought me on as the director of high school relations / assistant coach for his staff at University of Illinois. So having him in my corner at the start of my young career was huge for me.
You're always hired because you're qualified, right? And someone believes in you to be able to take on a role and be able to do it. But to be the first female on the coaching staff at Illinois, then the first time full-time female scout with the Bears, what do you remember about that feeling when you got that opportunity and those chances?
If you've ever heard the song by Eminem when he says you only got one shot, it's your chance now. That was pretty much me in those moments, getting hired at a young age, and being a part of many staffs with a lot of people with a lot of experience, whether that's been 10 years in the game, 15 years in the game at that time. So going in and just knowing this is the opportunity at hand and taking advantage of it and putting my best foot forward.
The Bears just hosted the first collegiate women's flag football game in Illinois history earlier this month. You were there to see it and speak to those athletes. I think back if I was in high school and I knew that flag football was going to be an option, you bet I would be playing flag football. I mean, how cool was that to be able to witness that and see the growth of that sport and the opportunities it's lending women?
Well, most importantly, I wanted to go out there and
right?
play. That was it was so much fun just standing there watching, but me being competitive, again, I wanted to go out there. So to see those young women played the game of football, and to be the first to do what they did with the championship here at Hallis, it was remarkable. It was more importantly, it opened the eyes of many that, you can get a scholarship to play the game, and you can also upcome and play in the Olympics. So if I had that opportunity back when I was young Ashton, that was something I would have definitely put on my bucket list. Like, hey, I want to play this game, and I want to take it to the next level.
It is so cool though. Like I think back to like the options. I played volleyball and soccer, but as a football fan, are you kidding me? Like that would have been my #1 choice. So I'm like, I just wonder what the growth of this sport is going to be as it becomes more available for all these women. Do you ever hear things of stories of girls coming up to you that are like, hey, I'm going to go do this and I'm going to make a career out of it?
Absolutely, especially with girls flag. I remember at the championship game, I've seen a lot of familiar faces. We've done multiple scout schools with girls flag at our facility, and I actually got this. It was a bracelet, and it has my favorite quote on. They made it for me. The
Oh
team
my
did.
gosh.
It says, "Job's not finished," and it was right before I spoke to both teams. And I'm thinking in my mind, like, hey, you want to have me crying right before I do a speech to everybody? So, having those young ladies build relationships with you, whether that's seeing you like something on this as an interview, just seeing what's possible. But, growing that and growing the game, I don't think there's a limit to what they're capable of doing.
You are someone that people are pointing to as she is an example of what you can achieve. And I think when we talked the first time, you're like, go higher than me, do more than me. You're just one example of what someone can do.
Absolutely. I'm still to that. I know we talked 2 years ago, but 2 years later, right now, that same mindset is still here. You go past me, go farther than me. I'm going to keep working, keep doing what I got to do and raising the bar. But I also want, young women who are watching as well to continue to raise the bar for themselves. So exceeding the expectations.
Just coming out of free agency, you're still in it. I mean, it never really ends for the Bears, and the excitement of building in the trenches, getting these guys here. What was your role in all of that? I know you mentioned off the top kind of like your day-to-day role that's in your job description, but because this is so new, like what role did you play with that big week that we had just last week?
Well, one is sitting in the different free agent meetings, whether that's as a personnel staff, and two, with our offensive coaches, defensive coaches, and getting kind of their collaboration on it as well. And then third would be, helping as a team build the board for free agency of who we're going to target and bring in and sign. So that would be like those main core things. And then most importantly is now that you've got your players is bringing them to Chicago, bringing them to Hallis Hall. So being a part of that process of the travel aspect, the visit, having the help of our scouting assistants, our logistics team. So yeah, it's a full go and it's fun because the best part about it is, you might get a call or a message from one of the players that we sign and they'll say, hey, the Bears are A1. This is the best visit I've ever had. And that just speaks volumes to us as a staff and the process that we have already in place.
Oftentimes I get asked personally, like, how do you deal with people who say, well, you don't know football. Like, you can't be in football. Like, do you have a response that you like to tell people if you've ever heard that?
I heard that a lot, but I usually don't have a verbal response. It's more so just my work and work ethic. So I just come back with the ability to help the team in everywhere I can. And, having the visible aspect of that of, hey, she's good at this, she's good at that. But also having, for me personally, understanding where I'm weak at. And it's not being weak in the game of football, but it might be, in a different area. And it's just something to continue to learn and grow on.
Both George McCaskey and Kevin Warren said, quote, when Ashton Washington becomes a general manager, you got a lot of people on your side. To hear those words, them speaking that into existence for you and wishing that for you and helping you get there, that's got to make you feel pretty good. I know you're a be where your feet are kind of person, but to be a GM and be a woman as a general manager, that is insane and so awesome.
You took the words out of my mouth. This is how I know you know me. I was about to say it's more so, one, thank you to Mr. McCaskey, and thank you to Mr. Warren for even saying that or speaking that high of me. But right now is being focused where my feet are, taking advantage of the opportunity at hand, being the best player personnel coordinator for the Chicago Bears that I can be, and not thinking too far. Right now, my mindset is what you just talked about, free agency and this upcoming 2025 draft, and bringing in new players to help the Bears win games.
You're talking to a little girl. She says, Ashton Washington, I want to be just like you when I grow up. What do you tell her?
Have a lot of confidence and never take no as the final answer. Keep working, keep striving, and most importantly, continue to exceed your expectations.
Ashton Washington, we appreciate your time, insight, and definitely motivation to all girls and women out there who want to get into football. And I think you've said it before, if you want to, there is a place for you and there's a place for all women in football.
Absolutely. Job's not finished.
We have great stuff from Courtney Cronin and Ashton Washington. Make sure to watch the extended interviews on the Fox 32 YouTube page. That is it for the offseason this week. We'll be right back here next week on Fox 32 Chicago and Fox Local. See you then.